Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. We will be on in just 1 minute. We're waiting for Zoom to allow people into the room. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we have a wonderful panel of guests that will be speaking to the refineries issue. Good morning, everybody. As folks are kind of coming in, very excited to be able to host this refinery webinars this morning. We've got a wonderful panel of guests. Woody Hastings will come on in just a minute. He'll go ahead and introduce our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. Why don't we go ahead and get it started? We got about 100 people here. We got very high turnout today for this webinar. And Woody Hastings, why don't we go ahead and kick it off?
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for our webinar this morning. My name is Woody Hastings. I'm the Phase Out Polluting Fuels Program Director for the Climate Center. And I'll be the webinar moderator today. Mark and Pamela are helping in the background. We're honored to be joined by 4 expert presenters today. Teresa Keats, Special Advisor to Vice Chair Sivagunda of the California Energy Commission. Mayor Steve Young of Benicia, California. Connie Cho, Senior Policy Advisor for the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, or APEN. And Josh Anajar, Executive Director of the Contra Costa Labor Council. Please post for the webinar. We're all going to remain on mute, all attendees, and please post questions in the Q&A or the chat. We'll be managing those from there. And a common question we get I want to touch on right away is that, will the webinar be recorded? Yes, it will be recorded and shared to everyone who registered and or attended. So let's see, next slide. So a little bit about the Climate Center first, and I'll be going through my opening slides pretty quickly so we can get to the main event today about refineries. So the Climate Center, this is a little photo of the board and the staff of the Climate Center. The Climate Center's mission is to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions everywhere, starting in California. We believe in thriving, healthy communities. We envision a future where everyone in California enjoys clean air and water, renewable and reliable energy, healthy food, thriving nature, and more. Need a big thank you to our sponsors, Bay Area Air District, Peninsula Clean Energy, MCE, River City Bank, and Sunrun. Also a big shout out to our promotional partners, Actera, Bay Area Act Now, Clean Coalition, Civic Well, Climate Resolve, and the Community Environmental Council, and Grid Alternatives. Thanks so much for helping get the word out. Climate Safe California, this is our flagship campaign. It calls on the state of California to enact the following solutions. And there's a link there in the slides that will be shared with you to access this. You can get it right on our homepage. It's to commit to 80% below 1990 levels of greenhouse gas emissions and get to net negative emissions as soon as possible and accelerate existing state policy timelines. We need to secure a just transition for workers, their families, and communities who depend on fossil fuel industries, ensuring their economic well-being. We need to close the climate gap to ensure low-income communities and communities of color are no longer disproportionately harmed by the health and economic consequences of fossil fuel use, production, development, and that they have equitable access to true climate solutions. And lastly, we need to enact a suite of policies required by science to put us on track for net negative emissions as soon as possible. We have 3 guiding principles that guide our work. Climate Safe California and all of the Climate Center's work is guided by these principles. Following the latest science, securing a just transition for fossil fuel workers, the communities and their families, and prioritizing climate justice with equitable access to true climate solutions. There are 4 ingredients in the recipe for a climate safe California. We need to pursue all of them in tandem to deliver on the promise of a climate safe future. If we can do this in California, now the fourth largest economy in the world, we can do it anywhere. We need to phase out fossil fuels and other polluting fuels. It's time to transition our homes, cars, trains, buses, and businesses to clean energy and improve quality of life for all Californians. We need to build resilient, affordable energy for all. As climate extremes intensify, it's time for California to build the grid for the future. Clean, local, affordable, and reliable energy can help avoid blackouts, reduce climate pollution, and protect our communities. We need to scale up carbon drawdown to get back to a stable climate. We must pull past climate pollution out of the atmosphere in addition to cutting emissions. We work to ensure that technological drawdown strategies are deployed responsibly and advance nature-based solutions that improve community health, increase food and water security, and protect wildlife. And lastly, we need to fund climate solutions by investing in climate solutions and prioritizing communities on the front lines of climate disasters and fossil pollution. California will save hundreds of billions of dollars and countless lives. So, now that you know a little bit about the Climate Center, our mission, let's talk a bit about the challenge in front of us. I'm sure most of the attendees here today are very familiar with the crisis before us. It's hitting harder and faster than scientists predicted even a few years ago. We've got devastating wildfires, toxic smoke, extreme heat, flooding, that's harming communities in California and beyond. The tipping points such as the collapse of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets, coral reef die-off, Amazon rainforest dieback, and permafrost thaw are all occurring. Fossil fuel, a little bit about health impacts. Fossil fuel pollution causes 1 in 5 deaths globally. Extreme heat kills more people in the US than any other type of hazardous weather. The 2020 California smoke storm is responsible for causing around 1,200 deaths. And we've got the more recent firestorm events where that has been compounded. 7.3 million Californians live within 1 mile of an oil, gas, or oil well, and there are all kinds of toxic exposures from those operations. And then we've got obstruction from the oil industry. Big Oil spent a record $38 million lobbying in California in 2024 amid record profits, year-over-year record profits. Oil and gas lobbyists are using massive profits to fight climate action and spread misinformation while benefiting from taxpayers' subsidies. We know that as goes California, often so goes the world. In 2025, California, as I said, is the 4th largest economy in the world. What we do in California reverberates around other states and around other countries. We need to get the managed transition planning right in California so it can be replicated elsewhere. I want to start today's webinar off on a positive note, which is this. Efforts over the past few decades to transition away from fossil fuels to cleaner energy systems appear to be succeeding. It appears that we are entering what's being called the mid-transition, where the old fossil energy economy still exists, but it's in decline, while the new cleaner energy economy also exists, but it's not yet fully fledged. This is good news. Gasoline sales have been in decline since 2016, and the impact of that decline on the industry needs to be managed carefully. Electric transportation is on the rise, but much more public support is needed there to make it a sustainable sector. Much of the discussion today will focus on the recent announcement about plans to close the Valero refinery in Benicia and the Phillips 66 refinery in Los Angeles, but the broader context is that there is a global transition underway and refinery consolidation is happening everywhere, not just in California. As the transition inevitably continues, we must ensure that frontline communities, workers, and consumers are protected from harm. Scan the QR code to send a message to Governor Newsom to lead the charge on protecting communities, workers, and consumers as refineries close. So that concludes my opening comments. I'm going to stop my share and invite our first presenter, Teresa Keats, Special Advisor to Vice Chair Sivagunda of the California Energy Commission. Teresa, the floor is yours.
All right, I believe we have some slides. Thank you so much. All right, hi all, and thank you so much to the Climate Center for hosting this webinar and for having me. My name is Teresa Keats, and I am a special advisor to Vice Chair Subagunda, the California Energy Commission, or CEC. The CEC is the state's primary energy policy and planning agency, which has in recent years had a growing role in planning and regulatory authority related to refineries and the petroleum fuels transition. To briefly share some of the CEC's major role in this space, as many of you are likely aware, we experienced pretty dramatic gasoline price spikes in 2022 and 2023, which prompted special legislative sessions in 23 and 24. And resulting legislation granted the CEC new transparency tools to better understand the causes underlying the price spikes, to begin comprehensive planning for the fuels transition, as well as some discretionary regulatory tools to protect consumers. And the CEC has placed significant focus on data collection, and the analysis of the effective use of some of these discretionary tools is ongoing. And then recently, of course, we had two major refinery announcements within the span of 6 months. So Phillips 66 announced the upcoming closure of its Wilmington refinery in the fourth quarter of 2025 and its conversion to an import model. And then this April, Valero announced its plans to idle, restructure, or cease refining operations at its Benicia refinery by the end of April 2026. Following this, the governor then sent a letter to Vice Chair Gunda, which directed the Vice Chair to recommend by the 1st of July any changes needed in the state's approach to ensure adequate supply during the transportation fuels transition. This then kicked off an accelerated process of state agency strategy and stakeholder meetings to better understand the issues and develop possible policy options. The Vice Chair sent this response to Governor Newsom on June 27th, and some of what I'm sharing here today comes from that effort. The next slide, please. So as Woody set the stage for, California's transportation sector is evolving really rapidly as our state's pioneering climate and air quality policies have accelerated the adoption of fuel-efficient and zero-emission vehicles, leading to a decline in demand for some petroleum-based fuels. Gasoline demand here through time is visualized, as well as the adoption of zero-emission vehicles. And this decrease in gasoline demand demonstrates California's successful progress in its transition to a clean energy future. But at the same time, this trend and other factors introduce some uncertainty and risk with unmanaged disruptions to the petroleum system. And in order to mitigate risks and successfully achieve our policy goals, we really need a careful transition strategy. This visual shows conceptual phases of a fossil fuel transition, pre, early, mid, and late transition. Each has its own evolving needs and challenges. And the phase we are in now has been described by researchers Drs. Emily Grubert and Sarah Hastings-Simon as the mid-transition, during which the demand for petroleum-based fuels, while it is falling, remains significant while the clean alternatives continue to scale up. And in this stage, the state must not only continue to support the growth of our new clean system, it must also manage an orderly decline of the fossil system. And investments in both legacy and emerging infrastructures are essential to continue serving needs during the transition. However, the confidence to support investments in the fossil system that might still be needed to support a smooth transition can really wane during the mid-transition phase, and proactive management is critical to support fuel reliability and economic stability, to protect consumers, workers, and the environment, and to continue progress and retain support for continued decarbonization. Next slide, please. So petroleum refinery conversions to producing renewable fuels in recent years and two anticipated refinery closures in the next 12 months that outpace the demand decline are symptoms of a rapid market evolution in the mid-transition and underscore the need for a holistic strategy. I think it's been a little bit expanded here on the scale on this slide. But what we are seeing here is the estimated in-state gasoline refining capacity over a 20-year period, each refinery represented by a horizontal bar, green for Southern and blue for Northern California. The purple line shows the maximum monthly demand for gasoline, including California consumption and what California supplies to Nevada and Arizona. And this visualizes the volume that needs to be supplied. Demand that isn't able to be met with in-state refining comes from marine imports of refined products, which is shaded in orange here. And I think the scale has been stretched a little bit. So after I can put in a chat that has it squished down a little bit. This is making the section of the imports very, very large, but the concept holds. The petroleum fuel transportation or the petroleum transportation fuel system in California is comprised of a pretty small number of assets, including currently 9 refineries that make California grade gasoline. And many of these assets' operations can't be smoothly ramped down while staying viable, resulting instead in nonlinear kind of lumpy impacts to supply when a refinery stops producing, which is seen visually here with step downs of refining capacity. And again, I can provide a higher quality image afterwards. I'm not sure what happened. Sorry about that. So California's in-state refining capacity is falling faster than gasoline demand now, and this trend is expected to continue. So we have the step downs compared to a smooth demand decline. This results in a significant increase in reliance on imported refined products. And the market may find a new equilibrium given enough time, but in the near term, such abrupt and significant changes carry risk of supply disruptions and price volatility, as well as impacts felt acutely locally, for example, to the workforce and to local economy, and really underscore the need for a comprehensive plan. The next slide, please. So we've seen a clear symptom of a changing landscape in refinery closures, but the challenges of navigating this petroleum transition successfully spans a complex value chain that must be considered as a whole. And the graphic on this slide shows the end-to-end value chain from crude oil production and imports into refineries, which then produce refined products, including gasoline, then imports of additional refined products. They are then stored and transported across the system and ultimately delivered to retail stations. And because of the interdependent nature of the value chain, major disruptions at any point, such as a refinery closure, can have consequences to the entire system. And these refinery closures or conversions, especially when they outpace fuel demand decline, mean you lose a big chunk of in-state supply from that orange box and put more reliance on imported refined products in the green box. Currently, about 10 to 20% of the gasoline we use is imported, and that number could increase to 25 to 35% by the summer of 2026, and up to 50% in the Northern California region after the announced anticipated refinery closures. And Northern California is already more import dependent than the South, and absorbing significant additional volume to compensate for further refining loss can run into challenges, including infrastructure bottlenecks and the timing of imports coming from long distances away. And policy solutions need to consider some of these trade-offs and the entirety of the value chain, which touches many different jurisdictions and stakeholders. And these transition policies are really, really needed to support workers and communities throughout and to continue successful progress in meeting our climate and air quality goals. Next slide, please. So the Vice Chair's office is incredibly grateful for the engagement with impacted communities and stakeholders, industry, state and local governments to better understand the issues and develop some possible policy options to support the transportation fuels transition. And developing and implementing policies continues as well with the expertise of other state agencies and with the legislature. And from the Vice Chair's office perspective, we really need to concurrently support a stable and affordable fuel supply and take a holistic approach to advancing a transition strategy. And to support affordable, reliable, equitable, and safe fuel supply through the transition, we think it's prudent to explore strategies to retain operations at existing refineries in California while demand continues to mitigate risk to supply and prices and enable whatever refined fuel imports we still need to meet demand. Additionally, a lack of investment resulting from uncertainty can pose risk to safety and reliability at facilities and will likely lead to further refinery exits faster than the decline in gasoline demand. So we see value in considering ways to support sufficient investment confidence for safe operations while they're needed. And at the same time, we recommend developing and implementing a set of policies and programs to support a holistically managed transition. These policies are really, really needed to further the state's commitment to protecting public health, workers, communities, consumers, and the environment, including, for example, transition funding to support workers and communities, protecting health and safety, planning for the future of impacted land, and continuing to promote emissions reductions to meet air quality standards and climate goals alongside a petroleum fuels phase-out strategy. And we think a suite of policies pursued concurrently to address both near-term and long-term challenges simultaneously are necessary to promote stability for consumers and to continue progress towards our clean energy future that benefits all Californians. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists in the discussion.
Great, thank you so much for that excellent overview, state perspective, really appreciate it. In one of your slides, I just want to mention to folks, there was the the word carbob in there. And just for folks in this space, you'll hear this term carbob. It really just refers, it stands for California Reformulated Blend Stock for oxygenate blending, something no one's ever going to remember, but it refers to California's special blend for keeping our air quality here in California, at safe levels. So just wanted to mention that. Now, without any further ado, thank you so much, Teresa. Without any further ado, I would like to bring up Mayor Steve Young, Mayor of the city of Benicia, the hometown of the Valero Benicia Refinery. So Mayor Young, if you could come on camera and take yourself off mute, that would be great, because we'd like to hear from you about a local government perspective, how Benicia is going to grapple with the impending closure, likely closure of that refinery next year. So can you come off camera and
Well, I'm trying, and it says I'm host has been disabled my video.
okay, thanks for letting us know that. Mark, can you help Mayor Young? There he
There
is.
we go.
Great. Okay, well, take yourself off screen now. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Woody. And I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to talk for a little bit about the the announcement by Valero, the impact on the city, and our plans for trying to transition away from the refinery and some of the timing issues around that. We were notified by Valero in April that they had submitted their 1-year notice to the state that they would be closing. I think that the phrase they used was restructuring or ceasing operations by the end of April 26. And we had a senior vice president from Valero come down and meet with the city manager and I to sort of, formalize this information. And what they had said at that meeting was, well, we had the refinery for sale last year, and we got an offer from a European refinery, which they did not name, but I'm guessing is BP. And the offer either wasn't good enough, or for whatever reason it didn't go through. And now we've removed it from sale. We're no longer interested in selling the refinery. We're simply going to close it. We're going to scrap all the infrastructure and we will be relocating all of our employees to other facilities within the system. And basically and also that they had engaged a developer out of Oakland to sort of deal with transition planning issues. I believe Signature Development is the company. My understanding is they've got what is known in redevelopment parlance as an exclusive right to negotiate. So over the next year, they're supposed to be looking at alternative uses for the 900 acres that Valero owns within our industrial park, with the idea that they would presumably buy the site at the end of the year and move on from there. One of the things that the Valero guy said was, well, that this plant in Benicia is the poorest performing of all the refineries in the Valero system, and that year over year, their numbers were down, and that when the stockholders or the board looked at this and was looking at cutting costs, it was a easy, if not understandable, if not easy decision to say, well, where are we going to look to cut costs? Well, we're going to look at the least profitable refinery we have in the most, excuse me, in the most heavily regulated state that we are. And from that perspective, you ought to understand why this is a sort of an easy call for us. Moving forward, we were obviously aware that the state and the Energy Commission that Teresa talked about was actively involved. The governor and the state was very concerned, I think, with the impacts of the closure in terms of supply. Valero represents about 9 or 10% of the statewide supply, and when you add in the closure of the Phillips refinery in LA, that pushes it closer to 20%. And there will be obvious impacts on prices if that capacity is not picked up somewhere else. And it's not clear that there is the ability to pick up additional refining capacity anywhere else. So our city manager was invited to be part of this Energy Commission group that came up with the letter at the end of June to the governor. It's a little frustrating for me and the city because everything is out of our hands, and we're sort of waiting for the last shoe to drop. We saw the notice from, well, actually it was a article in Reuters that you're probably all aware of that said the state was trying to find a buyer for the refinery. My first reaction was, well, you got to have a seller. Even if you find a buyer, you don't have a willing seller. Now, maybe this is just posturing on their part, but the local manager has said as early as this week that his instructions are still the same: to shut down, to begin the dismantling process, to offer up relocation to all the employees, and they're just moving ahead with this kind of a process. There are other impacts that are connected to this. Obviously, to the city, it's a huge financial hit. It's a $10 or $12 million hit to our general fund, which is probably about 20% of our general fund. But it also there's also not included in that number are the at least a dozen other companies in our industrial park who exist primarily because of Valero. Valero is their, if not only customer, they are their main customer, and these are companies that do pipes and valves and fittings and other things that are used by the refinery. So those businesses are at risk. All their employees are at risk. While Valero is going to resettle their own employees and pay for the relocation costs, no such thing is in place for these other businesses. And then there's the tertiary effect of the impacts on the local economy, restaurants, hotels, charitable contributions that Valero has made to the sports teams and nonprofits. So it's a cascading effect, none of which is positive from a fiscal point of view. Environmental benefits are obvious, but I think from our perspective, we would like to see a 2 or 3 year off ramp rather than an immediate hit. An immediate closure in April is going to have very difficult impacts on the community. We are working with Signature Development to try to scope out alternative plans for what might come next. And there are, we are geographically blessed in the sense that we have a deep water port, we have rail, we have 2 highways, we're in a good location for this stuff. 900 acres is a very big piece of industrial land that you can do something with. But Valero has said that they've already written off $331 million towards the cost of closure, and that doesn't count remediation, which will also add to that number significantly and probably stretch out through 5 years, if not more, to actually clean the site to make it available for redevelopment. So that's a relatively long period that we're going to have to go without the revenue that they represent. The other thing that's connected to it that may not be as of immediate interest to everybody on this call is they also run an asphalt plant at the refinery. That asphalt plant produces 65% of all the asphalt used in Northern California, everything north of the Tehachapies. The asphalt comes out of that plant. So the impact on street projects or cities and other things that use asphalt is going to be severe as well. So all the cities who are doing road and street repairs and Caltrans, they're going to expect some serious shortages and associated cost impacts for that. The causes of the closure, we mentioned the Valero, the lack of profit of this one. I think it's also worth mentioning that the Air District had put an $82 million fine on them. There was a settlement of a penalty that the Air District put on, and this was for 15 years of unreported emissions over well above allowable numbers. And Valero did, willingly agree, not willingly perhaps, but they did settle that and wrote the check. So, but now they're saying that this was a major factor in addition to the regulatory climate, and they want their money back. Well, they're not going to get that money back. That was a fine from the Air District. In full disclosure, I sit on the board of the Air District, but the board does not have any control or input into these enforcement actions or fines. So we are told after the fact, I was told the day prior to the announcement of the fine that it happened. But the Air District operates somewhat autonomously in that issue. So the looking forward, I think one of the things that I fear the most about all this, well, there's two things. One is a sale to an operator who may not be the best operator. We have examples in the Bay Area of refineries that have also had serious problems and where the management of those refineries has been problematic, shall we say. So that's one concern. The other concern, frankly, is this. In the report, it talks about the need for additional imports of refined gasoline into Northern California. And that implies, of course, you need a place to store it. And so because we are a deep water port and because Valero has all these big storage tanks already, one of our fears is that the state or somebody will say, no, you guys should just become a terminal, a gas terminal, take in refined gas, send out refined gas. That's the worst of all scenarios for us because there's no jobs, there's no taxes, there are continued emissions that we're going to have to deal with. And it also means that we would not really be able to start planning for the redevelopment of the site as long as we are a gas terminal. So again, this is another thing where the decisions are going to be made in Sacramento, presumably, but it's going to impact us directly, and we have no real ability to impact that decision. So maybe I will stop there, and hopefully that was a broad enough overview of the local impact of this closure. We're waiting for the next shoe to drop, and it's been frustrating to sort of sit on the sidelines and see your fate be decided by others. But I'll stop there. Thank you, Woody.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Young. Really appreciate that. And I think you may have already, sort of responded to some of, we got quite a number of questions in the Q&A about, sort of that question about what happens with the site. And it's clearly not something that is fully known at this time. but maybe we can touch on some of that later when we get to the Q&A. Next on our list of presenters, I'd like to bring up Connie Cho from the Asian Pacific Environmental Network to give us a bit of an environmental justice perspective. And Connie is a deep expert in refinery, technical expert in refineries, and in sort of other aspects of the oil and gas industry. So Connie Cho, the floor is yours. I see you're getting your slides up there. Let us know if you have any difficulty.
Hello. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Woody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here at the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. We organize Asian immigrant and refugees living close to California's oil refineries, the Chevron Richmond Refinery here in the Bay Area, and the Phillips 66 and Marathon refineries in Carson. We work in the multiracial coalition to advance environmental justice. And many of the following slides might be a little data heavy, but I'll be going over them at a high level just to help folks connect the dots to tell a bigger picture story of what's going on here in California, and then perhaps skate over any redundant information because of the great presentation so far today. California's oil refineries, just zooming out for a second, are incredibly massive. They stretch thousands of acres, and many are over a century-year-old. Even in areas with sources of pollution from diesel trucks or other industries, refineries can still be the largest source of pollution in a community. And while the demographics and industrial profile of Benicia, where Valero has a refinery, is a little different from where we organize, cancer rates are still higher than the rest of the county and the state. And aside from Mayor Young, I would recommend folks also reach out to community advocacy groups like the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program for more information. Across the board, state report after report has recognized that living next to or near an oil refinery is incredibly damaging to your health. These pollution hotspots have been locked in and made even worse by California's market-based programs, according to the state's own reports. Companies with oil refineries receive enormous subsidies through free allowances and are the largest users of offsets while continuing to flare, spill, and pollute locally. Now, a myth-busting moment here about the California regulatory environment and its impact. You may have heard that California used to have 40+ refineries, and that number has dwindled because of the state's policy. That is not quite true. This is a modified slide from Julia May, Senior Scientist at Communities for a Better Environment. We did used to see much more variation in refineries, and the smallest faulty ones could barely even operate from the start. As California demand has dropped, the larger companies have gobbled up even more of the market share, maintaining capacity and production levels by increasing their exports and ultimately forming greater monopolies, driving up prices to extract shareholder profits. And you can see that flatlining emissions trend here again with the state's own reports. As Woody has stated, California oil refineries remain extremely profitable. While it is true that there might be higher operational costs, because we do have and are proud of our higher safety standards, wages, and health protecting environmental rules, California refiners are raking in higher gross refining margins to make up for it. They are, in fact, currently at a historic high. And so what is happening? As Teresa mentioned, we really need to ground our analysis in the global oil market and drop in demand for gasoline. Even states like Texas, known to be much more deregulated, are seeing the refinery shut down. And while we do urge caution and need additional engagement to appropriate balance the considerations in some of the CEC Vice Chair's recommendations, we do recognize the Valero announcement does create this potential statewide supply crunch issue. But like the Vice Chair said in his letter, we do believe that the problem is complex but solvable through targeted measures to address near-term supply, as the letter sets out, and planning ahead for the impact of declining demand on other oil infrastructure and a holistic managed transition. These are the 3 prongs mentioned earlier. But I think what needs to be emphasized again is that the mid-transition or this managed transition does not mean slow walking our climate goals. Now, I'm happy to answer questions later about the specifics here, but I'd like to use this slide that sets forth the strategies we recommend to address this near-term potential crunch. To make one key distinction, there's near-term action for this session to take place. It pertains to a very particular volume of a potential crunch related to Valero. And then there's short-term oriented foundational steps that we need to take now to secure a particular level of slack or stabilization in the system. And this near-term timeline, as far as I can tell, is what's being driven by Valero, this legislative session. It's why the vice chair has been engaging stakeholders on an incredibly rapid timeline, it seems. But we can use math to figure out what that level of intervention actually needed is this session versus actions that may be rushed, reckless, and counterproductive for affordability and a poor use of taxpayer dollars. I would really recommend people connect with Julia May, senior scientist at Communities for a Better Environment, who has been running some of these numbers independently outside of the state as well. And aside from a very targeted near-term strategy, what we need to do is set up a foundation, again, to address supply over the next several months to be prudent and, again, spend taxpayer dollars wisely past this legislative session. So instead of a targeted strategy, we have seen, of course, oil companies spending millions to dupe our elected officials to walk back decades of health, safety, and environmental regulations, regardless of whether they will have an impact on actual supply. As oil refiners respond to declining demand everywhere across the globe, oil executives are blaming California's regulations in an attempt to shake down Californians on their way out. But it's also a deflection, as Mayor Young alluded to earlier. And this part is my opinion. It is an attempt to get taxpayers to pay for the industry's pattern of malfeasance. It is expensive to run these refineries, especially if you've been, but it's especially expensive if you've been deferring maintenance and cutting corners. This playbook for those in Northern California sounds familiar. It sounds a lot like PG&E's deferred maintenance that led to preventable wildfires and deaths. I do think that the example that Mayor Young gave is one of the most egregious examples, that Valero is shaving costs by quietly releasing cancer-causing chemicals into the air, skipping routine safety checks knowingly. They emitted an estimated 8,400 tons of toxic pollution, over 360 times the legal limit, not just a little bit over. And during the same period, Valero's stock price increased by 1,250%, from $6 to $127 a share. In 2023, Valero authorized up to $2.5 billion in stock buybacks, juicing shareholder profit while abdicating its responsibility to reduce dangerous pollution and invest in the integrity of the oil refinery. In 2024, local regulators finally took action and clawed back that $82 million fine for neighboring communities, which is pennies compared to the $4.3 billion returned to shareholders that year. Phillips 66 also, don't have a separate slide for it, but is also not off the hook. They knowingly dumped 790,000 gallons of industrial wastewater into LA sewers with flammable explosive substances for 2 years, which resulted in a federal indictment with millions in fines. I believe that proceeding is still ongoing. And from 2022 to 2025, though, Phillips 66 returned over $14 billion to shareholders in stock buybacks and dividends. So how is the state responding? I think the best part, the good news is what Teresa discussed, the recommendations around a holistic planned managed transition under the mid-transition framework. That by itself is a milestone in climate policy. And in response to the Vice Chair's letter, a broad coalition of environmental and environmental justice organizations did develop a response with some more policy recommendations, particularly in this crucial third prong. At the same time, we are still battling extreme proposals for rollbacks from the oil industry and their surrogates. I do think it's notable that the Vice Chair's letter held the line and did not endorse any outright rollbacks. And at the same time, environmental justice communities remain extremely concerned, of course, about a number of the issues in the letter, like the impact of the current oil and gas ordinance, throwing the at-birth rule back in the mix. It's hard to see how statewide supply also can be stabilized without imports, but timely imports shouldn't mean cutting corners on long-lasting environmental review. These are all things that we should watch for. Of course, the mention of cap and trade is particularly something that we should watch out for because they already receive enormous subsidies, and what will ultimately come out of the Valero conundrum. This isn't Big Oil's first effort to shake down Californians, but it really must be the last time we allow oil companies to hold taxpayers' ransom. As policymakers craft language to ensure supply flows in the short term, lawmakers and the governor also have to take action now to make sure this doesn't happen again. And before I close, I want to highlight one particular recommendation from the Vice Chair's letter that is extremely important to refinery fence line communities. Other industries, including gas power plants, nuclear power plants, oil drilling, and coal mines, are required to disclose, plan, and fund the cleanup of contamination before or during closure. Refineries are alone under the law, but they shouldn't be allowed to stay that way. And unlike other industries, they don't disclose the value of their asset retirement obligations to the SEC until the very last minute. And even then, it's not the true value. Mayor Young talked about their write-off, right? The state should then require refineries to disclose the real valuation of its asset retirement obligations at the very least, based on all of the precautions needed for a safe decommissioning and full extent of on-site contamination. And they really need to submit a plan to clean it up. I see a lot of questions about cleanup in the chat here. So to summarize, we want to see targeted measures to address short-term supply issues, stabilizing near-term supply, really focusing on just making the math work, not a kitchen sink approach. Health and safety to ensure safe, which are also reliable operations, short-term actions that fit in with a long-term vision, as Teresa mentioned or discussed. And we want to hold the line on health and environmental protections. We need to plan for refinery closures. Companies have to disclose the full extent and cost of the cleanup and remediation needs and a plan for the cleanup, at the very least. We need gap funding for workers and communities. And I believe Josh Anajar is going to talk about a little bit more about that. And we need to advance the transition away from fossil fuels still. We need to invest in EVs and transit equitably in our communities that are being left behind. And we need to coordinate the phase down of supply alongside demand. This is possible. There is another pathway ahead, something different from what the oil industry is trying to do here in California. Our communities have long advocated for the state to plan ahead for these refinery closures. And what we're seeing now is an abrupt, chaotic, and unjust transition. But we can prepare for an equitable transition by prioritizing investment and protections for the most impacted workers and communities.
Thank you so much, Connie. Very good, very good. And Mark, if you could drop also, in addition to the California Energy Commission letter, there you go, that's the one, environmental and EJ letter in large part response to the June 27th CEC letter. So yes, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, I would like to invite Josh Anajar, Executive Director of the Contra Costa Labor Council, to join us. He's on screen there, so I will, excuse me, I'm going to mute myself with all, and take it away, Josh. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name's Josh Anajar. I'm with the Contra Costa Labor Council. And what is a labor council? Great question. We're a federation of labor unions, so about 90 unions in Contra Costa County that all come together as to deliberate of what the future of labor is. So for us, you know, we sort of intersect everywhere in the Contra Costa economy, especially around refineries. We have workers that work directly in the refineries. We have workers that live in the fence line communities right outside the shadows of the refineries. On top of that, nurses are impacted, pulmonary nurses, you name it, as Connie went through sort of the health effects. That's another sort of section of our group. And then also county workers, city workers, social workers, you name it, that really depend on revenue coming into the county to provide the services that we all count on. And really things went very different after 2020 and the marathon closure, and I'm going to get to that. So first off, you know, let's just get to the slides. Let's nerd out on some slides, and then I'll blah, blah, blah as nerd out to it. How about that? I'm going to cut it pretty short on this. Let me just do a slideshow here. Bam. So look, in 2020, we got a phone call from USW5 that Marathon was permanently idling. And at the time, we really didn't know what that meant, but we certainly learned very quickly. Workers overnight lost their jobs, about 700 workers. 350 of them were with the USW5, which is the steelworkers union based in Martinez, California. Right now, Marathon is back doing renewable diesel, but only 25% of the workers were able to get their jobs back. And what this sort of shows in a larger framework is that there is no just transition right now for workers. I know many times environmentalists and community members and within labor say, oh, we just need a just transition and think that it's just going to happen. We are still living within neoliberal economics, and many times a voice at work is one of the hardest things to attain in California and anywhere in the country, to make sure that workers have better standards, ways to have economic justice, and make sure that they aren't led to exploitation. If I switch to the next slide. So one of the studies that we formed throughout this larger HRTP, which Connie of APEN, along with the Steelworkers, the Steam Fitters Union 342, and the Labor Council, along with UC Berkeley Labor Center, all brought together by Blue Green Alliance, was to really sort of begin to study what are the effects in Contra Costa's economy if we continue to see more refineries close down. One of the studies that I'm going to highlight right now was we were able to do almost like an ethnographic study of the workers a year, almost 2 years after they were laid off, to see what happens currently in our economy when we close down a refinery. What are the real impacts for working people? And I'm sorry if I haven't depressed you some. Hopefully we can not be, by the end of this, super depressed, but our findings were bleak, right? 26% of workers were still unemployed a year later. 24 of them, I can read all these, don't worry, but 24 of them also, 24% as the average wage cut that the workers had. Most of these workers, especially in the refineries, have a high school level of education, but were able to be a part of the middle class. And I think that's really key, that 81% of them owned their homes. They weren't going to relocate. On top of that, Marathon basically banned them from going to other Marathon facilities in other areas of the country because of the workplace standards and because of their voice at work that they had here, where in many places like Texas and other places where refining happens, they're non-union, which leads to further injuries of the workers, less pay, and less benefits overall. Most of the workers were falling behind. 1 out of 3 were falling behind financially, but 91% would want to do some form of enrolling in a training program. Part of the problem is that where the building trades and some of them there's sort of 2 different delineations. I'm sorry if I'm going fast here, but here we are. There are the workers that are operating the refinery and those that are also help building it and maintaining it. I think that delineation is very important. Electricians have their certification when they graduate through an apprenticeship program. They become a journeyman electrician. For those that are operators within Marathon, they didn't have that. Instead, the company owns their certifications. It didn't work with them. We had one worker after being laid off wanted to go work in a brewery, but they didn't believe that he actually knew how to work with pressure and valves and piping, which he obviously did working in a refinery, but there was no certification for that. There's a lot more that goes into the HRTP, which you can find, shameless plug, on our website, along with UC Berkeley and other places as well, that go into both the refinery transition planning, worker safety net, land use and decommissioning, which is very important, refinery community transition. All of these are part of a larger thing. And when we think about just transition, it has to be both something that creates economic resilience. So for Contra Costa County, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen here. Now I'm just going to talk. For Contra Costa County and the cities within it, the refineries, 4 of them, represent about $1 billion yearly in taxes. So it's not just refineries, but to what Mayor Young was talking about. If you think of refineries like a massive shark, there's a lot of fish underneath that shark that are eating off the shark, right? So that whole economy of both chem processing plants, et cetera, that are based near refineries translate to about $1 billion. And right now, there is no economic equivalent that we've seen that can maintain the the revenue that we're receiving through our government to replace that. And I caution, because so much of our fire department, our social workers, things like that, are still dependent upon having this economic base. Unlike like Alameda County and San Francisco, we are primarily a one economy county. Now, if you look at what is the second largest economic driver in Contra Costa County, it's investment bankers that live in Moraga and Orinda area. So unless we really make deep inroads into new scales of economy, it's really a doom spiral for Contra Costa County, because we don't have ways to both have new industries and that those industries maintain union. You know, the oil refining business for a very long time had been multi-generational. That means that their families and their kids and their grandkids also took jobs in these refineries, because they knew, obviously it was dangerous work, and it remains dangerous work. I'm not an oil refiner, but it still was a gateway into the middle class. And unless workers have a seat to really determine their own futures, and unless workers have a voice in these new economies, then we are creating more economic disparity. We're creating more depression, and really an economic system that basically neoliberals and the abundance movement, all that sort of want, which is less worker protections, less voice at work, and making sure that workers don't earn a decent pay. We don't want that in Contra Costa County. So in order to really talk about this larger transition, we have to center workers in that transition. And we have to make sure that workers' voice and what they need is key in this. And, you know, so many times with this new green economy, and we can talk about that, it is still hesitant to make sure that workers have a voice in the workplace, that workers can organize and maintain a level of economic freedom and a level of security that, you know, we want to make sure that everyone has healthcare. We want to make sure that everyone has retirement security. The best vehicle for that is through unionization right now in America, and we want to make sure that exists. So I know I'm running out of time. I think that was sort of my 10 minutes, but happy to answer questions around this. Look, at the Labor Council, the work that we've done in partnership with unions, with environmental justice, is key, because we want to make sure communities' voices are centered along with worker voices are centered. Those, and not just the voice of capitalists and tech startups and others that want to come in and not provide living wages, not provide healthcare, and make sure that an economy works for everybody. You know, work connects us all, and we want to make sure that there's justice, both environmental justice and also worker rights and social and economic justice. And really, we have a lot of work to do to secure this. And I'm very happy that in our county, there's things like the Green Empowerment Zone to start these conversations, but we've got a lot of work to do in order to secure real justice and making sure that we maintain our revenue in the county, new economic engines, and making sure that no worker is displaced, no worker has to take a 25% pay cut and have to scrounge to try to find work. That's a broken system. That's a broken economy. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen here. If I have one more second, you know, I say this a lot. I'm from Florida. I don't like to brag about that, but we saw it directly with the space industry there, where those were some multi-generational jobs. Again, they were putting people into outer space, right? Like the Apollo missions, you name it. Then when President Obama came into office, he got rid of the space industry, privatized it, and now it's run by Elon Musk. So again, and the sort of brain drain and the workers had an economic floor there is gone. We don't want to see that doom spiral happen here in Contra Costa County. And I see Woody's here to cut me off, and I'd be happy to answer questions as we go. Thank you.
Not really wanting to cut you off. Excellent information, presentation, perspective. Really appreciate that, Josh. And Mark, if you could, I wanted to drop the call to action one more time. I'm having a little trouble pulling my slides back up with the QR code. So if you could drop both the call to action into the chat, as well as, it looks like you maybe just did drop the report that Josh was referring to. Yes, good. So I see those both in the chat, and the call to action is there. Folks, please, if you joined late or haven't yet taken advantage of our quick and easy click, click, click call to action to get a message to Governor Newsom excuse me, to Governor Newsom to help with a just transition, managed transition, equitable, labor-friendly transition that protects communities and human health. And I'm trying to stop these notifications. So I would like to now get into our Q&A session. If folks could come on screen. The first question I would like to ask of all of you, if you have a perspective, you know, we are the overarching question, it was referenced several times, is the need for a holistic, comprehensive, coordinated plan to get ahead of these abrupt refinery closures and events that sort of get ahead of any prudent planning. So the question I have for all of you is, you know, what, from where you sit, what are the major barriers to the state adopting, you know, initiating, developing a plan and implementing it so that we can avoid a bumpy transition over the next couple of decades? And it's really something to think about for all of us as we go through the Q&A. I'd like to maybe start with you, Teresa. You know, what's holding things up? I know that there was a transportation fuels plan, transition plan called for in one of the special sessions back in 2023. And so, you know, what is it that's really making it difficult to move forward on that?
Yeah, thanks, Woody. I mean, an issue that is evolving as we speak, right? And it's an issue that touches really everyone in California, but many people in the state very acutely and very personally, with communities that have disproportionately borne the harms of fossil reliance, which especially need to be supported as the transition happens. And this challenge is critical to addressing climate change. And I think a big challenge is that no one has really done this successfully before, and the world is watching, which I think is also a really amazing opportunity. And I think a challenge that I see from the state perspective also is navigating pretty complicated trade-offs of policy choices, and that the system is touched by so many different layers of government, from federal to local, and that we really need to de-silo and coordinate between them in a way that can address short-term issues while at the same time continuing to promote our state policy goals, and with all the folks that it impacts. And that a successful and just transition really requires a lot of honest, hard conversations and really need to work together, which is work I'm very excited to be having happening.
Thank you. Connie, how about you? What's your view of, you know, what are the obstacles? What do you see as the obstacles to having a proactive plan in place?
You know, thanks for the question, Woody. I think for a long time, it may have been that elected officials may have had their heads in the sand, but I think actually beyond that, it's really oil industry misinformation. And the inherent information asymmetry that exists between, you know, the long-term business plans of the oil industry, and the fact that their interests are simply not aligned with the public's. Oftentimes people are looking for where that, you know, Venn diagram where there is consensus, where there is an overlapping interest in wanting to work there, which I think is incredibly important. However, sometimes the interests simply conflict. And so, you know, the state and the public and the state just doesn't have the information that they need to challenge the narrative, their numbers. But we know that they've lied to us and funded studies to lie to us about climate change. And we've seen this malfeasance all over their environmental health and safety record. So I think that that's a really key part of it. And then the question will be, you know, when we do have the right information, when we do have the right policy proposals, when we are organized as communities and workers together, will elected officials put communities and workers first, or will they be afraid of some sort of larger political zeitgeist or backlash that exists partially because the oil industry is also funding, you know, spending 7 figures on ad campaigns to spread their misinformation?
Thank you so much. Josh, we've gotten a couple of questions about how many workers are affected specifically by the Valero closure and what kind of opportunities for them are in the work. But so you could get to maybe some of those specifics,
Yeah.
but also to you, what have you seen as sort of the barrier to, a labor-friendly transition?
So great question. Overall, and I can kind of sort of answer both, right? In 2019, there were 5 refineries in Contra Costa County, and all were union, right? Wall-to-wall union in terms of all the workers there had collective bargaining agreements, healthcare, retirement benefits. The one in Benicia and Valero, it's non-union, but there still is, due to what the work that USW5, the steel workers have done to create an oil worker displacement fund. I'm sure that there are ways to help them as well. Right now, when we did our work within the HRGP, we assumed that by 2045 would be down to about 2 refineries in the state. Instead, right now, Phillips 66, that was once an oil refinery, is now biodiesel. Marathon is biodiesel. PBF is, I think, still offline due to fires and other disasters that have happened there. And so we're already further along than we expected to be at this time. And that's very troubling. The larger question, I think, in all of this too is how do we, and how does the state and others make capital, which is the hardest part of this, capital within the green economy, capital within the oil industry, to really invest in workers to make sure that we are prioritizing sort of a bridge for displaced oil workers into the new economies to make sure that economic justice continues. And that's a really hard thing to do. The workers that have collective bargaining, it just didn't happen, right? It was through blood, sweat, and tears of massive organizing that the steel workers undertook, multi-generational, to get their contracts to where they are. And capital never just gives to workers. So again, in this larger green economy that will, as California moves to this, how do you make that capital make sure that workers continue, have a voice at work, that workers have retirement security, have health care? And that's a harder challenge that we're still trying to figure out. It obviously deals with organizing, but again, after multi-generations of unions organizing and making our refineries the safest in the country, to then have to spend all of their money and all of their resources again to try to do this at new forms of economy, that's a lot to put on to unions that are already facing the burden on this. So how do we collectively, all of this is all of us together here. We're all workers. We all care deeply about climate change, our existential threats that are facing us. How do we make sure that capital cedes some of their power? How do we make sure that that workers in the green economy is not a road to the bottom and not exploited, which we have seen sometimes in solar, in battery manufacturing currently? Like, how do we make sure that high road jobs are created and we operate on that high road? I think that is key to making sure that there is some form of economic resilience, both here in Contra Costa County and across California.
Right on. Great. Thanks so much. Marianne, back to you. You're facing a sort of a real world situation there in Benicia with the transition. It's not academic. I want to talk about vision. What is your vision? This is a beautiful, I've been there many times up in that area and seen that refinery location. What's your vision for that site? We've got a lot of questions about the cleanup and the potential future uses and that kind of thing. And so, sort of with that same sort of overarching question of barriers to achieving a vision and all of that. What's your vision? What do you see as some of the possibilities for that specific site? And you're on mute.
Let me first answer the question about how many employees are affected. The number is about 420 employees, full-time employees that are Valero employees. There are another couple hundred that come in and out as contract laborers, usually around turnarounds. That hasn't been mentioned. A turnaround is a very extensive and expensive process. It takes tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. It shuts down the refinery for months. It's something that happens every 4 or 5 years. There's speculation that one of the things behind the Valero decision was the desire not to have to do another turnaround that was coming up shortly. In terms of what can be done to make this less painful in the future, one thing might be, instead of a 12-month notice, maybe an 18 or 24-month notice to the state and to the community of what the plans are. I mentioned earlier the possibility of us being turned into a terminal. One of the issues connected to that is, while we do have a deep water port that handles oil shipments now, as well as the shipment of cars, it's not electrified. So the tankers that come in continue to run and burn diesel and pollute the air all the time that they're in port. So one of the things that we would be hoping that might come out of this thing, particularly if the state sort of forces us to become a terminal, is there money to electrify the port so at least these ships can shut down when they're in port and not continue to spew emissions into the air. Now, as far as the vision goes, again, that's going to depend a lot on what the state determines. If we end up being a terminal, there's not a lot of vision, there's not a lot of things we can do. We're sort of stuck. But if that is not the answer, then we've been talking to both community members and Signature, who is sort of this transition development company, about what could go there. And so the site is sort of broken down into two parts: 500 acres sort of in the base of the refinery, and another 400 acres that acts as a buffer between the refinery and residential areas that sits higher than the refinery. That 400 acres could be developed as housing. We are pro-housing. We need more housing. So that's something that we could start working on sooner. Of course, it would have to have either site control by the developer or some approval by Valero because they own the land. On the site itself, a large part of that decision will sort of depend on the extent of the pollution and the remediation needed. And we're not really going to know until all the equipment is gone and you start digging into and looking at the dirt that's under the land. The refinery's been there for 50 years. So there's probably a lot of pollution that is collected over that period of time. So my understanding is you sort of have to start digging down and removing dirt and testing the dirt to a point where you get to something that's clean. Because we're close to the straits, there's also the issue of water intrusion and a high water table that limits the kind of development that can happen. But in general, I think we would be looking at manufacturing, industrial uses, perhaps some commercial or retail uses, probably not residential within the site where the refinery sits now because of these presumed pollution issues. The developer early on came to me and says, well, anything goes. And I said, well, no, not anything. There are certain things we don't want to see, that I don't want to see. And he says, like what? And I said, well, logistics for one. That's something that cities are being pushed by FedEx and others. There's a huge demand for logistics, warehousing and trucking. But from my perspective, it's a zero gain to the city. There's no taxes, there's no jobs. It's just warehouses and truck drivers and trucks that are beating up your roads. So that's sort of a non-starter. And the other one, of course, was, to me, it was self-storage. There's a lot of demand for self-storage, but it's the same thing. It just takes up land and doesn't really do anything for you otherwise. So those are sort of the things I don't want to see there, but otherwise, I think we'd be open to almost anything that makes sense and serves the community or creates jobs or taxes, frankly.
Great, great. Thanks so much for all of that. Turning back to you, Teresa, question from Greg Karras, longtime refinery watcher expert. The California Energy Commission has noted that refinery closures we're looking at here are part of a worldwide industry consolidation, and that the process results in fewer large industry players with more market power. And as you noted, this results in a bumpier, not a smoother transition. The worldwide business strategy is not because of site-specific economic conditions here. Given that, how does the CEC hope to manage the pace of refinery phase down without proposing any public intervention to directly control the refineries and the flow of oil, the throughput? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, thanks, Greg, so much for the question. And yeah, as you noted, a lot of these trends are happening not just here, but globally, which also means that in many other places, jurisdictions are learning how to navigate this at the same time we are. And there's not a lot of precedent to go by. I think that looking at the ways that some other places have dealt with some industrial transition issues is really illuminating, both lessons learned, positive and negative. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right to point out that the way that the market is operating now compared to down the line when we have fewer market players is different. And we need to consider whether the ways that we implement tools now might need to adjust as we go in the future. And we have a number of regulatory tools already. Whether the implementation or the suite of tools needs to change as we go along is something that we really need to consider as we continue to learn kind of this adaptive management idea. And the Transportation Fuels Assessment, which is a report that the Energy Commission puts out every 3 years, kind of assesses some of these options, and increased state intervention is definitely, I think, something that we need to consider and really consider the benefits and costs of it. Just a lot of this is uncharted territory, and to make sure that we are continuing to supply consumers with affordable, reliable supply and continuing to meet our climate goals. I think we need to consider a lot of options and learn as we go.
Thank you. A question for you, Connie. Do you have the tools you need? You know, the Energy Commission and Air Resources Board have been given some more tools recently with the special session legislation, but you know, data. You crunch data a lot. You look at the technical dimension. Do you have the tools you need? Public information available to you. So can you say a few words about the elements needed to manage a closure of these facilities from a sort of community perspective and the information available to you?
Well, I will say that the first special session, SBX 1.2 did a tremendous job in opening up the data and I believe, as the CEC often says, providing visibility into the system. I think that the Vice Chair's letter really indicated that there's a tremendous amount of information that we should really have, especially pertaining to the relationship between crude oil in relationship to each refiner and crude and pipelines especially. And they can't just be self-reported information and data from the refiners. We need strategies to have independent audits or the state be able to verify this. We can't have refiners and oil companies, pipeline companies setting their own definitions of what are, minimums or required. So I think that there's a lot around the, as demand declines, which is a good thing, it's going to impact the entire oil and gas system, the entire infrastructure system. And so we also need a lot more tools to be able to process and understand that, and to, as the CEC has said, plan ahead. I mentioned this before about environmental cleanup. The oil refiners are truly unique in that we have so little visibility into what's happening there on the ground. Theoretically, there have been questions about cleanup. It's at the discretion and pace of the water board to look into, closure plans, things like that. But by the time the closure announcements are coming around, the state and community are already very behind in what they need. And so they need to be acting a lot sooner. And that's why we really need to start looking at, taking their broad authority and saying, well, we need to target and, start acting like these places are closing, because they are. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we've been talking a lot about sort of the supply side and how we're gonna, well, the refinery closure and that, and the supply side. How about the demand side? Maybe going back to you, Teresa. The CEC letter from the 27th, June 27th, focused largely on supply. Are there strategies afoot at CEC for near term, in particular, near term measures that can be looked at that could further reduce demand? And then in the midterm and longer term, starting with you, Teresa, others can chime in as well.
Thanks, Woody. I think that is a really, really important question. And kind of that mid-transition idea of gasoline going down, zero emission vehicles going up really requires work on both ends, right? The managed decline and absolutely doubling down on reducing demand. So yeah, absolutely. A lot of that work is being done at sister agencies, and a lot of our work has been focused on kind of the fossil fuel ramp down in this space, but whether it's increasing access to zero emission or low emission vehicles, including charging, ways to reduce vehicle miles traveled through public transit and pieces like this. I think the idea here that none of this can happen in isolation and really needs to be considered concurrently, and driving down demand, especially in light of uncertainties that we are facing right now, is a key part of it. So I'm really glad to have that brought up again.
And I would just add that on the demand side, we are seeing the demand for EVs as sort of plateaued at about 25% in California. It is not really growing. It's sort of stuck at 25%. The idea that we're going to get to 50%, much less 100% EVs by 2035 is frankly fanciful. It's not going to happen. We should accept that. There's so much demand for electricity coming from industry for things like data centers, and the difficulty and the expense of expanding the electrical transmission grid is going to really inhibit the transition, I think, make it slower than it should be. And so I think it's in fairness, we have to look at, is it feasible that we can transition on the timeline that at least the state or the governor looked at initially, was to 100% of EV sales by 2035. That's frankly not going to happen. And I think the sooner we sort of accept that, it's necessary to deal with the real world. And I'm not sure that was at the time it was passed, it probably made sense, but now things on the ground have sort of outpaced that. And I think we should just sort of, talk about it, or at least accept that as a reality.
Well, with all due respect, I think that there are prospects for acceleration of EV adoption and possibilities. The Climate Center does a lot of work in bidirectional EVs, so they're not just a new load. They can also actually provide capacity and assets for grid management. So that's we'll see about that. Josh, any thoughts on sort of the electrification of transportation side? Are you seeing jobs in that industry? And tell us the truth here. What's the deal for workers in the new clean energy economy? We want to see it happen. Is it happening?
I mean, yes and no. And part of this is, okay, if we're talking about electrification, the grid obviously still needs to be completely redone to make sure that we can handle, to what Mayor Young was talking about, to handle the increase in electrification, et cetera. On top of that, there's a few if you look sort of the larger political economy of this all, most of the electric cars, I struggle. I bought a new car last year. I struggled to find a union-made, American-made vehicle that is electric, right? We're still operating with Tesla, as the largest electrical vehicle manufacturer, and I obviously I know you all like right when I said that, but you know, it is non-union, highly exploitive work there that they don't know the chemicals they're working with. Again, a lot of the green economy is still, unless workers collectively take their like and organize, and even then corporations are going to fight like Tesla did to stop them. On top of that, we have an economy in the Bay Area due to the larger influx of tech and billionaires and millionaires here that have pushed workers further and further out and displacing them from their communities that they're from, right? Or workers that once lived in Oakland are now living in Antioch, but their jobs are based in San Francisco or based in Alameda County and have to commute far a long way. So unless we really think about, and then also, if you're getting me on this, here we are, when we think about transportation, there's a push for autonomous vehicles to replace public transit and to replace bus drivers, to replace truck drivers. And all of that is another form of this larger displacement of workers from their economy. And it creates a drive to impoverish jobs, like what Mary Young was talking about in terms of the Amazonification of jobs versus actually quality good jobs. So if we're talking electrification, awesome, but there's still a long way to go around making sure that workers have access to it, that they can afford it. Many workers cannot afford or have the capital to afford a new electric car, and making so that's a whole other set of policy things that need to happen, and to make sure that we, you know, as we continue to push these Waymos and these electric vehicles, and yes, I understand the green aspect of it, that we are taking away jobs and food and economic security for so many workers that are going to feel the burden of this. So with every step, there's a larger political economy attached to it, and that's some of the things that we're going to have to deal with here as well. But you know, IBW, which is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, other unions are ready with trained workers to help improve the grid and make sure that's happening. And one last thing, I just want to say this, and then I see is with the Valero, the building trades, because of SB 54, which we can nerd out later on, are there as well. And I said completely non-union. I was wrong. I want to at least correct that. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Josh. And that's going to have to be the last word. The conversation kind of got away with me and I wasn't paying attention to the time. So really riveting. And thank you so much to our presenters and to everyone for joining and for your fantastic questions. And I'm so sorry we never get to all of them. So we will follow up with you as we can, and the materials will be made available to everyone. Here's once again the call to action to Governor Newsom to help get a transition in place that makes sense for California and gets ahead of these events that are getting ahead of us. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I'm trying to get to, I wanted to just let you know that our next webinar is going to come up on August 28th, once again at 10 a.m., all about advancing next-gen geothermal in California. Lots of prospects for long-lasting, large-scale clean energy that benefits all. Really, actually, Josh, a lot of opportunities, we believe. Skills transferability from oil and gas sector over to geothermal is nearly 1-to-1, so a lot of opportunities there. And once again, we do like to end on time, so don't want to go over. So just wanted to thank everyone once again for joining us. And that's my contact information there for anyone that wants to follow up and get in touch with us and follow up on any questions that were asked or get a hold of any of the materials that were shared. Everyone that registered and attended will receive the materials in a follow-up email. So once again, thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks again to our awesome presenters. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Woody. Thank you everyone who attended.
Thanks so much, everyone.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much. It was great to see you all. Bye.